This week we've been discussing how arcades have been able to rebuild themselves after a downward trend back in the early aughts. And I showed how fans have used this thing as, or were a major part of rebuilding. And now we have nostalgic games, we have more modern games. We have the ability to play them both and enjoy them both, and they're just a great part. And so I thought I'd show you the end result of all this. And they're called Geek Circles. And I'm just going to show them to you. When I was in Bremerton, I got to go on a arcade crawl. It's like a pub crawl, only you're going to see arcade games. And I walked around and I just looked at what arcade games there were. And, there was just an arcade after an arcade after an arcade. There's 6 or 7 arcades within a block of each other. And this is pretty impressive, seeing as Seattle has, the city of Seattle actually has the same amount of arcades, but it's a much, much larger amount of walking. So I was just really impressed. So I decided to call this place, this area, a new name. I decided to call it a Geek Circle. As said, it's a large geeky area. There are board game stores, there are model stores, actually the board game and model store are the same store. There are arcades, there are classic arcades, there are modern arcades, there's 2 barcades, and you'll have an arcade in 2 of the theaters, and it's just a helping supply of arcade. The geek-centric stores are exactly what they sound like. There are places for you to go and be a geek. And you don't have to be a geek in a specific area or a specific type of geek. They've got stuff for all sorts of geeks. And not only do they have a place, they'll very likely have a large selection of places. And even if there is only one place, they have a very, very good supply for it. The hobby store had, comics, had a very good selection of comics, and in a very well-organized fashion. But right next to it, in the same thing, was a model store. And then below it, or around it, were board games. And then there's even a kind of a creation station, a sort of maker fair type place. So you have all these areas and these things for you to see. And it's just a great way for geeks to kind of be geeky. And there's a reason why, and it's because the Navy had, back in the day, the Navy used to pay very little to their sailors, and this meant that there was kind of a stereotype of the sailor being kind of impoverished. And what you're looking at is actually a fountain right next to the naval base in Bremerton. And in Bremerton, there are tens of thousands of naval people. I was told that many of the people who run the arcades are actually Navy themselves, and they all kind of know the area, what kind of people they would have, and why. And the Navy actually raised their rates for the people, or for their sailors. And the sailors live mostly on their ship, but they're docked, so they don't pay rent, but they just live on the ship. And if they feel like going out, they, if they don't, blah, 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 blah. If they want to go do something, they, have a couple blocks outside of the naval yard to really do it. And that's where the Geek Circle is. And the other reason why it's a perfect place is sailors tend to be pretty geeky. They tend to test in the higher range. They tend to enjoy things like physics and chemistry and science. They tend to enjoy building and developing things. And they tend to enjoy being in a cramped little room with very little around them so that they can get their geek on. Just about everybody I know who's in the Navy is some form of a geek. So there's not a lot of people who are just like, yeah, I'm just going to go play sports now and, ignore all the geeky things. So this was a prime area. There's 20,000 people ready and willing to spend their money on geeky stuff. So they just started to build all the stores within the area that they knew would be perfect for these sailors. And it is a very small area. It's what I was told was this was basically the area you would walk from the naval base to the bank. So the bank is at one point, and the other point is the naval base, and between there are all the restaurants, the arcades, the geek centric areas, so that they can cover everything that anybody would want. And you know, they just have as much as they possibly can cover in that very, very small area. And this creates this very geek-centric type place because, the Navy has all these geeks and arcade fans and stuff like that. They can kind of concentrate. It's almost like if somebody decided to undilute juice or something like that. This is pure. This is a lot more pure than other places around it. And they also have variety. And even in the arcades, you'll see a variety. You'll notice that there's a Super Nintendo sitting next to a full arcade. This is at another castle barcade in Bremerton. It's one of the first things you'll find as you get off the naval yard. And they've got everything decorated and stuff. And then there's a wide variety. Just a block away is a place called Quarters. And in Quarters, they have a lot more newer games. And they're there more for, families to get together and have birthdays and play the newer games. And honestly, many of the people who are going to go to another castle probably won't go to Quarters, and vice versa. But that doesn't mean that they're not both successful. In fact, when I was at Quarters, somebody was having a birthday party. So, they both work. You have the nostalgic kind of game here, and then you have kind of the newer style games over here. And everything in between. You'll have multiple barcades, or multiple geek, I'm going to call them geek bars. Ashley's Pub had board games on a wall, and they had console games in an area, and they had, the day I was there, they happened to have puzzles to put together. And this actually brought me up with an interesting question. I've been in these areas before. When I was a Mormon missionary, I was in an area for a year. It's just this geographic area that I was assigned, and I was told, okay, you're not going outside of this area. You're just going to go, work in this area. And in it was this mall that was very, very geeky. There were, 4 board game shops. There were 2 or 3 console shops. There was an arcade. There was a a skateboard park in the mall. They had a couple knife shops, just a lot of stuff. And on the outside was an arcade called, I forget. But this is a picture of the arcade, and I actually didn't know about the arcade. I must have rode my bike past this place, 1,000 times, but it never occurred to me that, hey, there's an arcade in there. But on the outside were all of these kind of, there was a roller coaster, but there was also an obstacle course. And it's made me wonder, why don't we have athletic things for geek stuff? And I think that might actually be like the next thing. Like, okay, we've proven that, geeks pay money. They are a good customer base. You can kind of concentrate an area for geeks. Let's start getting them into athletics. Let's make a place for them to work out. Let's make an obstacle course that's very geek-centric. And that's my kind of thinking is, why don't we have athletics for geek stuff? I recognize what I'm saying here, and I fully understand that some people just don't want to move that much. But if you wanted to truly enjoy the Geek Circle, you're going to have to do a lot of walking. You're going to have to do a lot of, talking and schmoozing with people. And there just seems to be this this opening right there for some kind of athletics, not soccer or sports as you know it, but I am totally thinking a boffer war type area, or one of those Dodge Aero places that would actually work, or find an abandoned place and use it for laser tag. In Rexburg, Idaho, there is a really cool arcade called the Craze. Sorry, the Craze. And the guy who runs it used to do laser tag in it. It was just a rundown storefront, and nobody was in it. And he was renting on the second floor, and he and his buddies would just get together, and do laser tag. And finally, the owner of the building was like, I want to use this area, so I'm going to put in some laser tag, and he was for it. And when I met the guy I'm talking about, he was reading, Warhammer 40K thing. He had, arcade. He had an arcade area. He had, a kids playground area. He had miniature golf. And you know what? The laser tag fit perfectly. So I think, if I were being honest, that should be the next place for kind of a geek circle, is athletic type spots. A laser tag type place, or something that feels like a video game and isn't, if you will. And what you have to recognize is you need fans to build. Yes, you have all these geek-centric stuff, but you have to make sure that it shows that there are fans here and that there are fans who are building it. Like I said, many of these places were started by people who were in the Navy and had been working in the conventions themselves, and had noticed who the fans were, how to sell to them, how to get the market to them, or what the market was actually like. And so they started working with each other to make this thing. There have been some complaints I've read about, or I've heard about, people giving each other bad names and calling each other stuff, but I don't think it's as big or as bad as people have said. So it's an interesting thing. All these people who have started these places, this is Ashley's Pub that I was talking about, and literally on the other side, there's board games there, and yeah, as you can see, all sorts of cool stuff here. And they did not try to make a specific, or they did not try to make it look cool. They tried to fit everything that would fit what a geek would want in there. And they would look at the age and look at how that age would work and how that age would think for this pub. And so really what it looks like, and what the geek-centric area, the geek circles are, is the eventual build-up from what we'll call the end of the world. Then you'll have fans getting together and building it back up. They'll use conventions and other ways to kind of find out where the fans are and how they're doing things. And through their own connections, building these conventions and making networks, they'll start to be able to open up store fronts and areas for people to go and do. And this is a process. And I think I showed you that process in the last video. And the rest of this month, I am going to be talking about how to prepare a convention, what goes on, how it happens, and as many intricacies as I can show you. I have been doing this for, I'm on my 5th year now, so I've seen a lot, and I just want you to see it and experience it, or understand it before we start to get into a lot more of the conventions showing up. In June, I am going to 2 conventions, and I'm going to try to give you as much as I possibly can. I do this every year anyway, but this year I'm going to try some new methods and some new tricks so that you can really enjoy it. So it's going to be a fun month, and this is going to end my intercultural history and video games lecture series, and then we're going to get into the history of video games, and I'm going to include arcade history in there as well. And unlike the others, I am going to say that arcades continued so that I can show the changes in arcade games and how they maneuvered around. So I will catch you all later. Bye now.